We ended the last lecture module by considering an example of a content distortion fallacy of relevance, that of straw man. We'll begin this lecture module by considering yet another example of a content distortion fallacy of relevance, red herring. Red herring gets its name from the practices that people use when training dogs to follow scent. So you start by training the dog to follow the scent of a carcass or a skin that you pull around the ground. As the dog gets better at that, then you start to drag smelly things across that track in order to keep the dog focused so the dog doesn't get distracted or diverted by other scents. And this is in fact what the arguer in the red herring fallacy does. They distract you, lead you astray off the main trail and onto some side alley. And if you're not careful and you don't notice it, you think that they have in fact given you a good argument about the topic that you were interested in. So this is an example of red herring argument that was actually presented in roughly this form. I'm paraphrasing. When budget cuts to the University of Minnesota threatened the integrity of the university library system, some academics have recently suggested that cuts to university budgets will result in the university libraries being forced to cut subscriptions to important academic journals. I say that we have the finest public libraries in the country, and the budgets are not being cut to these libraries. Academics should take advantage of our fine public libraries. Now, the governor knew full well that he had committed a fallacy of red herring. In talking about university libraries, he subtly switches the topic over to public libraries, acting as if public libraries and university libraries have the same funding streams and the same missions, but they don't. They have different funding streams and different missions. And so equating one to the other, suggesting one could stand in for the other, is in fact a fallacy of red herring. University libraries are academic research institutions. Their goal is to develop a repository of high-level research materials for the purposes of academic research at the university. Public libraries just aren't like that. Public libraries are funded by cities and counties, and their stated goal is to provide resources for the community. So children's books, novels, classical music, G-rated films, internet access, how-to books. These are the sorts of materials that one finds in a public library. This is the mission of a public library as funded by the city or the county. The state funds university libraries for an entirely different purpose, and hence when the governor shifts subtly the topic from university libraries to public libraries, maybe the average person in the general public doesn't notice that shift. But that shift is crucial because now the governor is talking about something that is totally irrelevant to the topic of whether or not the university libraries are being undermined by those budget cuts. Does it in a way that if you're not paying attention, you suddenly get diverted off into this side avenue by the governor. Think maybe, hey, the governor has made an excellent point, when in fact the governor is just, I'll delete the expletive on that one. So red herring is another fallacy of relevance that turns on content distortion. Our final fallacy is the fallacy of missing the point, or if you like those Latin terms, ignorato elenchi. Now, in Hurley's text, he tends to treat missing the point as kind of a trash can fallacy, where you put fallacies that you don't have any other place to put them. But missing the point is actually a storied fallacy dating all the way back to Aristotle, who identified it and discussed it in his early writings. What is the point of missing the point? Well, ignorato elenchi is roughly translated ignorance of the proof. And Aristotle's idea here was that when people commit the fallacy of missing the point, it's more like the case that they don't know exactly how to construct a well-designed deductive or inductive argument, say in standard form, so that the ideas are related together in a way that makes sense. You can see the connections and they make that inferential claim, and the inferential claim holds. one of those elements is missing and missing the point. Usually it's because the person doesn't really connect the ideas together with sufficient rigor or thoroughness to support the transition from the premises all the way to the conclusion. So here's an example. The United States is the only major industrialized country in the world that has not adopted the metric system, and that's true. And I resent it deeply. I have to buy 2 different kinds of wrenches, and NASA keeps crashing things into the surface of Mars because they forget to convert the units, and etc., etc. The rest of the world better get with it and revert to the English measuring system. The problem with this argument is, how did you get to that conclusion? The rest of the world better get with it and revert to the English measurement system. The fact that the United States is the only major industrialized country in the world that doesn't adopt the metric system, that doesn't seem to obviously and clearly lead to the arguer's conclusion. They would at least have to fill in some of the dots. And in fact, if we start to think about what's going on in this argument, it doesn't make a lot of sense. After all, the whole point of a measurement system is that it's easy to use. It's a set of conventions that are adopted widely by societies that interact with each other. The English measurement system isn't even used by the English anymore. It's a measurement system where you're counting, for instance, by 12s, where freezing is 32 degrees, and so on. It's not a great measurement system, and it's certainly not the measurement system used by most countries around the world. And hence the United States is an outlier. And so if anything, it looks like this argument would be better off if it tried to establish the conclusion that the US should abandon the English measuring system, get with the rest of the world, and adopt the metric system. We'll continue to look at informal fallacies in the second and third lecture. Again, working on our ability to be able to categorize them with relative ease based upon a familiarity with the typical signs and features that are indicative of that kind of informal fallacy.